I've been looking for a job since last month. I was getting desperate with so many unpaid bills piled up. I applied for so many jobs, but the rejection letters kept coming. At that time, I was ready to do anything for some money. One night, I got a letter from a company called Apex Solutions. The letter mentioned an interview scheduled next week at a place in the suburban areas of Bakersfield out on the edge of town. The letter seemed kind of unprofessional to me. It didn't have a proper description of the post or the company itself, just a congratulation for being selected. It didn't even mention the exact time for the interview either. I had never heard of a company named Apex Solutions in my entire career, but I figured I may have applied and forgotten about the company since I did a lot of applying that month. The interview was a chance I could pay the bills, so without hesitating, I took it and prepared to go for the interview. The next day, I woke up early and prepared for the interview. I took a shower and took the formal clothes from the closet. The location from the email was 7 miles away from my apartment. I got there early, but the parking lot was completely empty. There were no cars or anything that gave off office vibes. At first I thought that maybe I came to the wrong address, so I checked my phone to look at the email again. But according to the email, it was the same address. That was the correct place. There were a few uncleaned, overgrown weeds poking out of the cracks in the sidewalk. This definitely didn't look like some kind of headquarters. I waited in my car for a bit, figuring maybe I was just super early at the place. But half an hour passed and no one showed up. I went inside thinking maybe it's not how it looked from the outside, but the place was just the same on the inside. The entire area was empty. There was no one at the reception, just a dusty table and a couple of chairs that looked like they had been through a war. On the right side, there was a hallway leading off to who knows where. This was not what I expected before coming to the place. It felt like the whole place had been abandoned for decades. I turned back and was ready to leave the place. But then a guy came out of the hallway. He was a tall, middle-aged guy wearing a suit and tie. The man introduced himself as Alex. He looked professional and asked me if I was there for the interview. I nodded and asked him what the company was actually about. He didn't answer and told me to come with him to the office. He led me down the hallway, but it was even creepier there. No open windows, no other employees. Just the footsteps of Alex and me in a hallway that led to dark, empty rooms. I asked Alex if it was a holiday or something since no one was around. He said it was a holiday and they were moving the main office uptown. The employees were working from home, so in the meantime he had the opportunity to take some interviews. I felt relieved. It was not a scam or anything. Alex then stopped at a door and gestured for me to go in. It was a small, empty room except for 2 chairs and a desk at the corner. The air was thick and some strange smell was coming from the room. I didn't find a single company logo or any pictures on the wall. Nothing. I couldn't put my finger on it, but something felt off about it even though Alex said they were moving. Alex sat across from me. He told me to sit and started asking me some usual interview questions. I answered him and told him about all the companies and places I had worked before. He nodded to every word I said, but the way he kept looking at me was a little alarming. I was used to men staring at me before. As a woman, you have to deal with it every day. I thought maybe I was being paranoid. But then Alex asked me if I lived alone. It was unnerving. The question had nothing to do with the job. I tried to steer the conversation back to the job, asking what role I would be given. He just tilted his head like he didn't hear me say it. He then said, "Let's skip the formalities. We should know each other first." It was getting too personal now. I told him some random nonsense about team building and contributing to a team, but he just stared at me, giving me a creepy smile. He said it was important to know what kind of person he was working with. I just sat there screaming from the inside. I regretted entering this empty building. It was a big fat no after meeting the guy. I told him it was nice meeting him, but I didn't think this was the right fit for me. He then stood up. He wasn't smiling anymore, just a cold, emotionless expression on his face. He asked me in a low and menacing voice if I didn't think he was good enough for me. I didn't answer. I just bolted for the door, my heart pounding in my chest. I could hear him yelling behind me. He was shouting at me to come back. Alex rushed toward me. He almost grabbed me by my hair, but luckily I was able to close the door. He was slamming at the door, twisting the doorknob to open it. I held the doorknob as hard as I could, but I was filled with hope when I saw it. Alex accidentally left the key in the doorknob. I turned the key and locked Alex inside the room. He was screaming at the top of his lungs, cursing me to open the door. I ran down the hallway as fast as I could. I rushed towards the parking lot. The car was parked in the middle of the lot. I was shaking while unlocking the car. As I pulled out of the parking lot, I glanced in the rearview mirror. He was standing behind the car. How was this possible? How did he get out so fast? I didn't think much. I floored the car, the tires screeching as I sped away from there. Alex didn't move an inch. He just stood there. The image of his face burned into my mind. I went straight home after that. For a few days, I kept receiving random emails from different companies asking me to meet at the same address. I was scared to even get out of my place. I knew it had something to do with Alex. He was trying to lure me again with those emails. I used to go for hikes with my dad when I was a kid. Those were some of the best memories of my life. He used to teach me all sorts of things. I learned everything I knew about the wilderness from him. Things like reading a map, using a compass, how to track animals, and respect the power of nature. Those days, it was just the two of us and the endless adventures. We used to explore trails, and he shared so many of his stories with me. But sadly, it didn't last long. He passed away a few years ago, and without him, I couldn't feel the connection I used to share with nature before. But one day, I decided to go hiking to honor his memories in my own way. I felt like it was my own way of feeling close to him, to feel like he was standing beside me, leading me to the wild. I was thinking about going to the Redwood National Park for some time. It was the kind of challenge he would have wanted. I spent weeks poring over maps and trail guides, learning about the rugged terrain and the steep climbs. It was terrifying, just as I had wanted. I was in good shape, had all the right equipment. I was ready to embrace the challenge that was about to come. It felt like my dad was daring me to prove myself. The park itself was a hiker's paradise. The ground, covered by the tall redwood trees, formed a cathedral of green. The air was crisp and cool, along with the scent of pine needles and damp earth. I had set off early in the morning, eager to explore the trails. The trailhead was deserted, but it wasn't surprising. Most people choose the other popular and easy trails, but I liked the solitude. It gave me a sense of freedom, of being alone with my memories. The first few miles were relatively easy. The trail elevated its way to the dense forest, but as I climbed higher, the trail became more challenging. The path narrowed, and the terrain grew steeper than before. The trees seemed to close in around me. Also, the sunlight that had been dappling through the canopy earlier was now almost completely blocked out. The air grew colder too, but I didn't stop. I embraced the difficulties head-on. I reached a certain section of the trail that hugged the edge of a steep cliff. There were no guardrails, no safety nets, just a narrow path with a sheer drop on one side. I could hear the wind whistling, a sound that sent shivers down my spine. I cautiously edged my way along, my eyes fixed on the path ahead. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. It felt like something was following me. I kept glancing over my shoulder, but there was nothing there, just the endless rows of trees, their shadows stretching out like long, grasping claws. I was halfway from the end, but the trail didn't seem to end. But when I checked my watch, I realized I was running out of time. I had to reach the summit before nightfall, or I'd have to spend the entire night alone in the dark forest. I picked up my pace, ignoring the growing pain in my legs. The trail twisted and turned, leading me deeper into the heart of the forest. The trees grew denser, their branches interlocking overhead. It was getting dark quickly, the shadows becoming deeper, and the area became more quiet. I still wasn't able to see the end of it. I switched on my headlamp. By then, it became completely dark. Even the occasional hoots of an owl could be heard in the distance. The headlamp only illuminated a small area of the trail, leaving the rest dark. It made me nervous. I was never on a hike this late before. As time went by, the air grew thick. The silence made it difficult to breathe without noticing. But the feeling of being watched gave me goosebumps. It wasn't just some intuition. It was a feeling entirely different. Just then, I heard a faint rustling in the distance. The feeling persisted. It was like the forest itself was alive. I froze, my breath catching in my throat. I held my headlamp steady, trying to pinpoint the source of the sound. Then I heard another rustle, but this one was closer this time. And then a low growl emanated from the depth of the forest. It wasn't the sound of any animal I had heard before. It was something different. My blood ran cold. I realized I wasn't alone there. I wasn't just being watched, I was being hunted. I ran as fast as I could, my feet scraping on the uneven trail. I didn't know where I was going. I just needed to escape whatever was stalking me. The growls grew louder, more closer. I could hear the rustling of leaves near me. During the rush, I stumbled on a root and went sprawling, my headlamp flying from my grasp. Everything went dark. I took out the backup flashlight from my pocket. I was trembling. The thought of a predator lurking nearby terrified me. But when I searched my surroundings, I was shocked. It wasn't an animal. It was something else. I saw a human-like figure, taller than the trees, standing in front of me. Its eyes glowed in the darkness. I screamed at the top of my lungs. A primal scream of terror echoed through the dark forest. I turned and ran again, my flashlight beam cutting through the darkness. I felt the searing pain in my feet, like hot knives slicing through my flesh. But then the growl stopped. It was gone as if it was never there. The entire area was quiet again. I laid there, gasping for air, my whole body shaking. I didn't know what it was or what was the purpose behind all this. But I didn't give up. I kept going until I reached the trailhead. I was exhausted. I was terrified. But more importantly, I was alive.